Now, explain to me, why am I supposed to care that Russia and Ukraine is at war? Mind you, I come from a culture of nations warring, and I know the average human being won't really respect or understand, right? That
Mm.
the culture of gangs and community, grouping can be as they don't understand how much it can really be just like what's going on. Like I hear them say all the time to me, "Oh man, it's senseless violence." But when has violence ever made sense?
It depends. Oftentimes, when has instigating violence ever made sense? Because if you're getting shot at and bombed, it probably makes sense to fire back.
I think it does. I don't know in this liberal space of the world, you feel me, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah.
I talk to my childhood partner Sherry all the time, and she is like entirely just so scared of having to stand up and fight back. And it's
Mm.
always the weirdest thing when I hear people say to me, "Oh, people killing each other is so bad." But if you're a spiritual person, right, and let's say you're Christian or you practice Catholicism, right, you're Catholic, like Adam and Eve's sons killed like people have been killing each other since the beginning of time and finding every and any reason to fight. And what I notice is always a wealthy person or a person that's in a quality situation telling people stuck in poverty to behave.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I mean, there's been uprisings and things like that throughout history as well that were not necessarily wealth driven.
And
Though
Russia,
the wealthy people were telling them to behave.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Listen here, Haitians, behave,
Behave.
behavez-vous.
Behave, brother. You know what I mean? So um like it's a bunch of white people fighting, Pete. Like, and it happened to be a bunch of white people who historically don't have favor towards black people. Well, I mean, they not obviously, the slave drivers of but historically, right? So I do tend to have a certain feel towards Ukraine just because my nation in Watts is a small nation. You feel me? And fighting great nations, they will try to bully you. So that's why I find myself cheering for Ukraine, and I like the Klitschko brothers. I like the Klitschko brothers. And I like Usyk. You feel me? So I don't know if I should be as liberal because people are dying. Like, it is a war. But I guess I've been conditioned by the community, right? That this is normal. You know what I mean? Not to mention every book I read is normal. People always fight. They just find a reason to fight.
I mean, Ukrainians and Russians fighting, by and large, is not that irregular. Um, so there's
So
that
so
also.
this is your world, Pete. First off, this is no ceilings. GL, my man Peter in the Spiznot. Sometimes
You
we
know what
forget.
else has no ceilings?
What's that?
Many of the buildings in the Ukraine.
Okay, so this is your specialty. Now, I don't know if it's your specialty, so I'm literally being prejudiced by assuming
Yeah,
you, as a white man in America, would have any idea what's going on in European nations. But I would bet you have a greater understanding of what's going on than I do.
I actually thought about starting a couple of social media channels to do long form videos about this kind of stuff this week. I just didn't get around to it. It's been a weird week. But yeah, this is kind of one of those conflicts of the market, so to speak. Um, the amount of, to put it generously, spin on like the premise and context leading up to this thing has been a joke in a lot of media circles. there's a lot of strategic benefit to um, Russia taking Ukraine. It's kind of something that has been on the agenda basically since what's his name, since Putin like ran Boris Yeltsin out of office in like the late '90s, and he also has this. Hmm?
No, no.
I was say Putin also has a grand vision of I think trying to reconstruct the boundaries of the original. Sounds like almost the original Russia Tsar's empire or something. Like he's
Okay,
got a lot of.
so Russia, that's where I was getting to. So Russia was, so in theory, Ukraine initially was Russia.
It depends on when. I mean, because at the same time, Stalin took over the Ukraine and basically it was like the breadbasket of Europe. It's one of the largest grain producing countries in the world as far as like wheat and shit goes.
Okay.
And he tried to socialize it famously by giving all the peasants all the property. Well, guess what? The peasants weren't really good farmers. That's why the really good farmers got really good at farming. So they all fucking were shitty farmers. They all starved to death.
It's not funny, but
it's
it's only funny to you because you just don't fuck with socialism.
it's funny because all the people who seized all the farms decapitated all the farm owners and their families, and then they were like, yeah, now we got all the farms, and they couldn't farm worth a shit and starved to death. So it's
That's
kind of
fucking funny, but it's not funny, but it's funny.
Yeah.
I get it. Okay. So it started off initially as Ukraine, or did it start off initially as Russia? Or it's
I'm
kind
not
of
gonna
been
lie,
one of
I don't
those.
even know. I don't even know, and I don't even know when you could even. I don't know how far I have to go back to make that assessment. You know,
So
I mean,
what
like,
I imagine in my mind, now it's imagined, right? It's imagination,
hmm,
that Russia is trying to claim territory that was once theirs.
that's what they're saying.
That's what I would want to believe is happening, right? But
Yes.
now at this point, there's been a culture established. You know, it's
Well,
a
there's a schism there, so there are pockets of the Ukraine that identify maybe
sure
more
as
so as
Russians.
Russian,
Yeah.
and others that don't. And he's trying to use that as a predicate to say, oh, we're going to go. The Russian sectors of Ukraine are being oppressed by the non-Russian sympathizing Ukrainians, and we're going to go liberate our Russian people and take those things back so that they stop being oppressed by the other Ukrainians.
So this is how I imagine this shit going, right? And I'm gonna give you the gang analogy.
Hmm.
So there's this huge gang in Los Angeles, right? One of the earliest gangs, um, early 70s, maybe right towards the mid 73, 74. A-Tray Gangsta Crip.
Oh yeah,
Legendary A-Tray Gangsta Crip, right? Tookie would have been, you know, West Side Crips is the emphasis, you know, is the origin, but Tookie probably would have identified as gangs split up into a A-Tray Gangsta Crip. A lot of the earliest members of the West Side Crips are A-Tray Gangsta Crips.
okay,
Monster Cody is an A-Tray Gangsta Crip. They're like a super legendary militant gang, right?
yeah,
So at that time, if you kind of fell, if you named your gang Gangster Crips, you kind of fell into a simple alliance with them alone,
yeah.
right? Because you guys all shared the last name. So there's a gang also in Los Angeles called, well, initially it was called Menlo Gangster Crips.
Okay.
Menlo is off of Vermont, you know,
Yeah.
right near Florence. Yeah, Florence.
Yeah, Menlo runs a long way. It goes all the way into Gardena. I
Yeah.
didn't know north south wise where Menlo Crips really was. It's over near the Florence
So yeah,
area.
it's over by Florence. Yeah.
It's not by where the horses are all with the little
No,
hills and stuff
no,
down
no,
there.
no, no. They're not that far
Okay.
down. So they were Menlo Gangster Crips. So imagine they were closer in proximity. Atria is huge. And Menlo is actually not that far the more I think about it. It's pretty close to where A-Trade border starts. But let's say it was a
Yeah.
part of the territory that was A-Trade initially, because they are a part of the territory that is known as Gangster Crips initially. Well, sometime I think either in the late 90s or the 2000s, they fell out with the A-Trade. They had some kind of conflict. I don't know if it was over wheat. You know what I'm saying? It was over something that was worthy
Some kind of a
of
plant.
Yeah, some kind of, most likely some type of economics and some types of mishap. And they decided, hey man, we don't really agree with the way things are going. So we're gonna drop gangster Crip off of our name. So what we're
Yeah.
gonna do, we're gonna just be Menlo Crips. And there's another gang in Los Angeles that's probably even more famous than the A-Trade Gangster Crips. And while they aren't as militant, they are very popular. Films have been made about them. One of the most famous rappers from Los Angeles over the last 15 years actually is from this neighborhood, right? Is the Rolling 60 Crips. Now, historically, the Rolling 60 Crips have had a long-standing rivalry with the A-Trays,
Yeah.
right? I like to look at the Rolling 60 Crips as America. I like to look at Russia as the A-Trays. I like to look at Menlo as the Ukraine.
Okay.
So the Rolling 60 Crips, right? They are a part of a greater, somewhat treaty or organization, right? Called Neighborhood Crips.
Maybe they're kind of like the EU.
Yeah, something like that. I could go I go EU, but it's more like NATO.
Gotcha.
And the reason it's more like NATO is because it's really like one main source is stimulating the whole concept and really low key has entirely too much say, and that would be the Rolling 60 Crips.
Yeah.
Um, I would like to think of the 111s, the Rolling Hundreds, the 111 neighborhood Crips as the UK. You know, they're the older established neighborhood gang. But long story short, all of these different gangs around Los Angeles are part of this NATO organization, Neighborhood Crips. The Rolling 40s are Neighborhood Crips. The Rolling 90s are Neighborhood Crips. The 5-5, famous C-Mac, shout out to C-Mac, 5-5, 5-7, 5-8 are Neighborhood Crips. All of the Neighborhood Crips, that whole thing was started by the East Coast, right? The East Coast are the original Neighborhood Crips.
Hmm.
So they, all these different gangs, 9-0 is Neighborhood Crip. All these different gangs kind of came together and created a treaty that they will somewhat function together and organize together and think together. So the 60s saw what was happening, right? And different people that associate them saw what was happening with the conflict between Menlo, you know, which was previously known as Menlo Gangster Crips, and the actual A-Trey Gangster Crips, and decided to start politicking with the Menlos and say, hey, man, you guys have conflict with these A-Trey guys. You guys should be a part of our alliance, right?
Mm.
And we'll support you, you know, in your standing feud with the A-Trays. So Menlos decide to become neighborhood Menlo Crips. Even to the point where some are claiming, if I'm correct, like rolling 70s, right?
Okay.
So the way I see the war going, it's like Russia's saying, and now mind you, the neighborhood alliance, right, is starting to use the Menlo territory to position people against Russia, you know, in that territory to get the drop or whatever they think is needed, you know, in that territory. So one day the A-Trays decided, hey, enough is enough. We're going to run leadership out, and then all the citizens, you know, are going to fall in line. This is going to be gangster Crip territory again. That's how I imagine it happening.
Yeah, and there's kind of a twist. I could put if I could put a hypothetical into this because yours has kind of not been hypothetical.
Sure.
It would be like, additionally, if Menlos are relying on 60s to get them all the shit they need because they got a Menlos is in a war now, right? But you get some activist guy who, like a big you know, were to step down or whatever, and some of his predecessor, not predecessor, but his heir or whatever, steps
Sure.
in and goes, "We're not gonna push no more dope anywhere here in 60s. You're not allowed to do that anymore." Well, now your resources are diminished, and
Oh, so you're
it
saying
drives up
so?
a
So it's the
trade's value, and
equivalent.
they hustling,
So
and
it's
they
the
get
equivalent if Big U, right, is the chairman of the NATO group, which he probably to some degree has. It's not crazy to say he would have, a pretty close relationship to that title. If it's not him, he's one of the closest guys. He
yeah.
says, okay, the Menlos are funding this war because they're buying drugs from the 30s, or they're buying all the drugs that they're selling in Menlo
Well,
right to their
Menlo
customers.
has like it would be like if Menlo just had like
No, let me finish my
oh
thought.
sorry.
So what you're saying, what the NATO car, what the neighborhood car is doing is they're going to. Okay, so no, you're saying people are cutting off. Oh, so they're trying to handicap the A trays. Russia.
Well, they're not. What
Okay.
I'm saying is like say A Trey wanted to do this, and it had been going on for a long time. And
Yeah.
Menlo, just by virtue of its location, it just doesn't have that kind of market. They're not.
Yeah, it's not enough territory to create
Yeah,
the
and, and,
revenue to
and in
fund the
their
war.
territory, they don't have
Humans.
the
They don't
audience.
have enough humans. Yeah.
Yeah, they can't make any money over there.
Yeah.
So if they're really going to have a problem with trays, and if there's a drought and whatever else, now all of a sudden Trey has a plug, and 6 O's who usually would hook Menlo up to make sure that they were straight. Everybody from Menlo go get your burner for 6 O's. We got you. We're not going to
Yeah.
let you just get eradicated by these guys.
Uh,
And then you goes, we're not going to hustle no more. We're going to look out for the community. We're not going to sell no more dope than 6 O's. Well, then
no,
the
Big,
well
Big U
dries
is
up
from
for
60.
Menlo's.
Hold on, slow down. Big U is from 60. He's from
Yeah, like if he were to say in our area,
okay in 60s.
in 60s, no one from 60s is selling any dope in 60s or you're out of here. So that does two things. That means anybody who wants to get anything to, to smoke whatever the hell has to go into A trays and they can spike up their prices because it's a super drought and their benefit and they getting all the money.
So
And
so
now
so what is America cutting off that Russia is able to benefit from? Like
America,
back to this. Back to this.
well, yeah, I mean, Joe Biden has completely, if not entirely locked down, he has really stamped down our oil extraction. If you notice
Oh,
price,
so what you're saying is because he decided so what Joe Biden did was in his attempt to handicap a trade's economy.
it wasn't an attempt to handicap day trades
Well, I
economy.
think that's how it's
No,
being told to us.
maybe. After the fact.
So let's focus for you going to the depth of
Yeah.
your non-love for Joe Biden. Let's focus on what he's
No, I'm not
presenting to
doing
the
that.
public. No, I'm saying let's focus on how it's being positioned to the public. What's being positioned to the public is Big U came out and said, "Hey, you know what? Everybody who's providing drugs to the A trades, to sell and make profit, right? So they can fund this war. We're going to cut you off. We're not going to get drugs in that community. Don't sell guns to that community. Don't do anything, right? With a goal of cutting off their way of financing or fighting the war against the Menlos, right? That's how it's being told to the rest of all of the communities to say that the 60s are truly
Yeah.
backing the Menlo,
They're
right?
trying to sanction out eight
The depth
trades.
of, huh?
They're trying to sanction out 8 trades.
Yeah, right. So it's saying, hey, nobody else that's around the A trades, don't give them bulk drugs, wholesale drugs to sell. They don't need to be making money. Hey, don't sell them guns. Hey, don't do anything that could, we're going to cut off the economic base that the A trades are using to fund the war against the Menlos. That's their way of helping the Menlos. And what you're
That's the
saying
way.
is that's how it's being positioned to
That's how it's being
the
positioned
rest of the
now,
game.
and that's true now, kind of. It's more so true than while the U.S. is saying we're going to sanction Russia. We really didn't want to sanction Russia. It'd be like 6 O's really didn't want to play that card that hardcore.
Because they need something from their trades.
Yeah.
What do
And
they
so
need from their trades?
if I could real quick go back in time just briefly. So like when prior to 6-0 saying we're going to sanction 8 trades, prior to that,
So before they shut down all their ways to fund the war against the Menlos. Go ahead.
yeah,
That's
prior, yeah, exactly. So a year before that, Big U wants to hypothetically take a principled stand and say we're not going to sell no dope in 6-0s.
So what is the dope they're not selling in America?
Oil.
So you're saying the president of America is not saying he wants to sell oil in America?
That's correct. I'll just give a quick synopsis on that real fast so that we're not jumping back and forth too much.
Sure.
What happened was we were supposed to have what's called the Keystone XL pipeline. It was a massive.
Sure. Trump was building that was going across the Indian, that was going across somebody's hood with dead people, and it was like, yo, don't build that shit in our hood.
Yeah, which again you could zigzag. It's not the end of the world. He just his environmental contributors said we don't want it. Period. So he shut it down. Additionally,
so in other words, again, they're using false propaganda to shut it down.
Yeah, and on top of that,
I was always told or positioned that it's native land and people died there. But go ahead.
Yeah, again, it hasn't been built yet, so you can just it's a pipe for Christ's sake. It's not like we're whatever.
Sure.
The other, and that was to really bring Canadian oil down to all the refinery hub and the port. You know, when you drive down the 10 from Houston to Port Arthur and Beaumont. So the real issue that drove a barrel of oil from a resting general equilibrium of about $40 a barrel up to $100 a barrel was that he also said, I'm going to cut all the leases on extractions. So we went from the number one oil producing country in the world, not Saudi Arabia, not Russia, not anybody, it was us under Trump, and oil was way down at 40. Well, you take all of that supply out of the market, it goes way up, way up. So now
everything is imported.
Well, it's all imported, but also now there's scarcity. So now the rest of the market's worth more. They can charge more for the demand for their stuff.
Yeah, because that point control the price.
Exactly. I mean, case in point.
So I'm explain. Go ahead, and then I'll explain it in gang terms.
Yeah, and what you saw happen here right before we're gonna levy all our sanctions and be all on top of shit, we drove up. We more than doubled the value of Russia as a country by doubling all their resources, which is all that they have.
Yeah.
And in the last month and a half, the Chinese, who have now aligned with Russia because we didn't manage that relationship worth a damn either, purchased $250 billion in fossil fuels from Russia. So now Russia has money to play with. So they don't need to give a fuck. Oh, we're going to sanction you. What do I care? I just got $250 billion from them.
Money. And the who. So I'm going. Here you go. So I'm gonna translate that in gang talk. Give me a second. I'm putting it together. So what you're saying is
Florencia's was wholesaling out to everybody.
No. Here you go. I got you. So Big U, right, decided that too many of the homies, he's using a propaganda sense, too many of the homies are being harmed and dying, right? And I hate to use Big U because it's a whole bunch of real G's that got too much say over there. But Big U, for just sake of conversation, as part of America and as part as an important person in the whole NATO organization. So Big U is saying, hey, too many of the homies are dying from drugs. So what we're going to do is we're not going to sell drugs. But his underlying motive for not really selling drugs would be what? Like, why is he not trying to? What's the point of him not doing the pipeline for real?
There really isn't a point. The point would be one of two things. You can say he woke up and had an epiphany and wanted to pursue some exalted vision, or you could say LAPD or the city or somebody bankrolled a bunch of cash and said, hey, look, property values are going up over here in the 60s. I'm going to give you $5 million through the back door, and you need to make sure no one sells drugs in this neighborhood. That's really more like it.
So he cut off the opportunity for other 60s,
Yeah,
right, to make money selling drugs in the
absolutely.
community by saying other members of the 60s were getting sick and dying from the drugs.
Exactly.
So now
Or just
the
from the
60s,
neighborhood, because the neighborhood, he's supposed to look out for the neighborhood too,
sure. And yeah, he's very much, yeah,
not
sure.
just
Whole
active
NATO
gang
alliance.
members, but just people
The
who
whole
live in the
NATO alliance.
area.
But I'm saying, so
Yeah,
he cut off his homies from creating their own revenue right in the neighborhood. Feel me? By the propaganda is, oh, too many homies is dying from drugs. So now the homies have to buy drugs from other communities and they're paying exponentially more.
yeah, and they're buying them from 8 Trey largely,
Oh,
which is
and they're
also not
buying
very
it.
being
So
talked about.
now it's dangerous to even deal in it. It's and it is not because people will just sell drugs to anybody. They'll make it safe for you to spend your money, but so it's driving the price up. And you're saying they don't care about the relationship NATO has or the neighborhoods have with all the different alliances because the main alliance that A-Trade gets their finances from is China, which is Hoover. And the neighborhood alliance, the NATO alliance, has no say in China or Hoover.
Yeah,
Oh, that's deep. That's deep. So what could be happening is, now this is me thinking as a gang member. He didn't take a cut from somebody. Big U didn't take a cut from somebody in the 60s. Big U took a cut from somebody from A-Trade.
and from somebody from Hoover's.
Yeah, sure.
It's really
It's a personal
more so.
cut in order to sell out your nation,
Exactly.
to sell out the 60s. So he would have to, he would have to make a deal with the biggest D boys in A-Trade and the biggest D boys in Hoover. And they say, hey man, cut off all the dealers, all the 6-0 dealers. Feel me? And you don't have to sell anything, and we're gonna pad your personal pockets at the expense of the
Yeah.
whole community that is the Rolling 60s.
Or to make it more accurate, we're gonna pad your son's personal pockets, and you're gonna get a commission.
Yeah, because you're not gonna be alive too much. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, I could buy it. Yeah, I'll buy it.
Hunter, you.
Yeah, I'll buy it. I'll buy
Yeah.
that. I'll buy that. I'll buy it.
So it's pretty easy to follow. That's about what's happening.
That's deep. Damn.
I mean, if you think
It
about
is
it,
exactly like gang banging.
yeah, like hypothetically, like if Russia wanted, or like the one thing Russia has is fossil fuels. They have natural gas, oil, and coal. Right? They have a lot. They have nothing else. The one thing China needs is cheap energy. They have everything else. You know, if they wanted to buy the same volume of cheap energy through fossil fuels 18 months ago that they bought 18 days ago, instead of paying 245 billion or whatever, it'd have been like 120. So just the difference alone on market, from market manipulation that was done domestically here, gave them more money than they'll ever need to take over Ukraine and half those other stupid countries.
So what does this really mean what happens if the A-Trays eventually turn, if the A-Trays, aka Russia, turns the Menlo territory back into gangster crip? How does that truly affect the world? Does it? Does it really affect the rest of the ecosphere? Like, does it really affect everything else?
It depends on if that domino tips over and hits another domino.
So you're
That
saying
domino by itself, not the end.
If the Hoovers decide to go in and colonize some other part of it, let's say the Troubles.
Or just say, let's say that the Hoovers and the 8 Trays then are like, we're basically lockstep whatever we're doing. And Hoover said, we're going to back you and fund 8 Tray for whatever the hell they want to do. And 8 Tray goes, you know something? I want 40s. I'm gonna go snatch up Denver's. I'm gonna snatch up 90s. I'm gonna grab Harlem's. I'm gonna grab everybody near me, and then and now all of a sudden the entire landscape is totally shifted, and that's really, I think, the concern. And you don't really want to get in their way because now they're so bankrolled because they got exclusives with Hoovers that it becomes really, really, really hard to stop that snowball when it's rolling downhill.
Do people really want to go to war that bad? Like, do they really want to? Like, this is my thing. It's a lot of talks of nuclear war, right? But I don't genuinely believe no leader except who I would like to call the Inglewood families, North Korea, right? I think their leader for sure wants to use nuclear weapons. He don't give a fuck. But I don't.
And pretty soon, when whatever gang Iran has one by about noon tomorrow, they're gonna use them.
Yeah, they definitely are looking to use them. If they can get their hands on them, it's on.
The only hope we have is that they're so anxious to pull the ripcord on them that they blow them up before they get them out of their own country.
Sure.
Just out of sheer enthusiasm.
Okay.
I think really what you're looking at more is a massive financial
war. But are we being ridiculous by thinking that the A-Trays would go past colonizing gangster Crip territory again? Like they're going to try to flip a completely like a power in the NATO organization, in the neighborhood organization, even with Hoover backing them, like a war. Even with the A-Tray, with the Hoover's backing A-Tray to take over Japan, which would be the 30s, would be tough because
no, that's all like the East Side. That would be like if Hoover by themselves said, "You guys go and do that," and meanwhile on the sneak, we're gonna grab Broadways, we're gonna grab East Coast, we're gonna grab.
Yeah, but you can't grab. But that's my point. The reality is, the Ukraine didn't align themselves with neighborhood, right? They didn't. They're not actually. They were still like ally and respected. But again, now you start talking about going to fuck with the 40s. This is a different kind of nation. This ain't the motherfucking, this ain't the Menlos per se. And I'm not saying, these are much bigger gangs, much bigger territories, and a lot more closer to America, the 60s.
Yeah.
So it would be a different kind of, it's one thing to go at the Menlos, right? Because the Menlos are in a part of town that really is close enough to Gangster Crip. And really, they're actually, America is further away from the Menlos, right? The neighborhood, the 60s is further away. And they do have other, just like around Ukraine, there's other NATO countries, but those countries aren't big enough to step in and deal with the A-Trays.
It would probably be like them grabbing like the Harlems of the world and stuff like that.
Like Harlem's is like Japan. Like you're not going to take Harlem.
No. Japan is like the East Side gangs.
No. France is like the East Side gangs.
Not geographically, because what this play means.
Don't look at it geographically.
You have to for one reason.
Yeah.
China also wants to make moves. So there is a physical shield. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
If Russia flanks out to the west, it affords China the ability to flank out to the east and grab Taiwan, start to press.
Sure, which I agree. It's one thing for them to grab Taiwan, right? Let's say Taiwan is the Troubles. The Troubles are pretty much cool with Hoover. They have a alliance. They straight. But it was a part considered at one time Hoover. So it is a nation formed right within a nation.
Yeah, but Taiwan and China are not cool.
Who?
Taiwan and China.
No, but they still have a relationship.
Yeah.
They're not enemies at this point.
Yes, they are. If you ask the Taiwanese.
Huh?
If you ask the Taiwanese.
Yeah, but again, ask the Taiwanese, ask China. Like the day China decided to be something. But even geographically, for them to make a move on Japan is a different kind of war. That's not like going to war with Taiwan.
No.
Like it's just different. Now I'm not saying it's not a winnable war for the Hoovers to take over the 30s, but nigga, it is some shit. And it's a chance because like the 30s are such a cultured country and well prepared, maybe not as deep. You know, it's a ton of Hoovers. Hoovers stretch the huge gang, right? Violent gang, right? But the 30s is some violent, sick motherfuckers. Historically. I mean, complete with suicide bombers over there in the 30s.
Yeah.
Them niggas get cracking. They not Ukraine. It ain't no posing for pictures with them. You know how the Ukraine dudes got they polo arm joining. Yeah, that's not 30. They you're gonna lose motherfuckers fucking with 30. And I don't think, and that's funny because they are very much not a part of NATO. They are alliance, they are allied, but they're not a part of NATO. Which is funny because the 30s are not quite, they're not neighborhoods, they're rolling, so they're allied, but they're not a part of the alliance.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. So it's a different thing. Like, do we think, even if it's happened, let's say it happens. Let's say A Trey overtakes the Menlo leadership and makes that territory gangster crip again.
Mm.
You're saying between the A Trays and the Hoovers that they can start to move on different nations, different hoods, and take them over? You think that's the fear?
Well, yes, that is the fear. Whether it would play out like that or not, that is the fear. The fear is not, oh my God, the most corrupted, impoverished country in Europe now just got taken over by the second most impoverished and corrupt country in Europe. That's not the fear. The fear is the second domino. And really, I think the issue comes down to, like, how much do you want to hamstring yourself in like a financial war? I mean, China's laying inroads all over the world right now for strategic positioning for all sorts of things, and whether it be, military-based port access, strategic positioning.
Like America, like the cities, they do the same thing.
Yeah, access to, but they're not a market economy, so it's bad for other parties when they do it more so than when the United States does it. Access to resources and whatnot, like the whole, like the whole green movement and all that shit with the batteries in the United States and Western Europe, they're all obsessed with. They all require these things called rare earth minerals. Rare being the key word. China's staking out and laying claim to access points to all of those things.
Sure, they all in Watts. I call Africa Watts. They all in Watts.
Yeah. So, like, magically tomorrow, if like California passed laws where every car by 2028 or 2030 sold in California has to be an electric car,
still gonna have the same problem.
They're not gonna look at the batteries. It's like nobody even looked around before they passed the law. They just passed it on passion. So, like, when you start to see, okay, well, if they're buying, if they have an energy source, and additionally also, the Chinese Air Force, they can't produce a jet on their own. They need Russian technology, and they need to steal ours to do most of what they do militarily anyway. Well, Russia is more sophisticated in certain areas, so that solves that problem for them. You're talking about major, like, hegemonic interests. It can get a little slippery kind of quickly.
That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. So if you were running, let's say you were running the 60s. Let's say a Mumpy, Kev, Chief Stone, Big U. They say, you know what? We need to nominate Pete to be the triple OG of 60s.
Yep.
The triple OG of 60s. Pete, you have to guide the 6-0 nation and the complete alliance that is neighborhood into the right direction and not allow the A-Trays or not allow the second domino to happen.
Yeah.
What is your move at that point?
My move, honestly, I am going out and calling Mexicans. And I am sourcing my product for cheaper. And I am flooding the market and I'm going to all the state facilities and I'm putting money on every MA's books saying, I'm going to cash you guys the fuck up, make sure that nobody on the streets in any of them 13s sells anything to anybody from Hoover, Orate, Trey, green light them if they do. And we'll starve them out and flood the market, and whatever they have is going to be worth less. We're going to have more. We're going to expand our influence, and we're going to control things on the market side peacefully through the dollar and through the supply and demand principles of the market.
So who are the hoods that you're calling at this point? If you're saying it's pretty much, who are the other hoods that
you
they're
have
buying
to
from?
you have to kind of use.
Isn't that in theory kind of what they're doing now?
Kind of, yeah. I'm using, like, say, the Mexican gangs and that whole sourcing apparatus of that supply chain as a constant. The same way that, like, our oil reserves are a constant, you know. So when I say I would call on everybody, every source point that we have, and start to bribe, you know, interest and exclusivity with them to make sure they're selling to us at a cheaper rate and not selling to them. Or if they're selling to them, whatever, their shit just went down because the price of a bird just went from 26 to 13. And who cares? We got a whole fucking ton of them, so it doesn't matter.
Is there anything you can do as the leader of, let's say, the 6-0 Nation and the Neighborhood Alliance to stop A-Trade from turning Menlo back into a gangster Crip territory?
At this point,
yes.
Yeah, Europe actually, to their credit, stepped up. Like, we had a lot of sanctions that we really were just kind of like,
our shit was fluff. They shit was real over there.
Yeah, they really did. And if they wanted to, like, pack a bunch of, like, take or like risk their neck on delivery and go put a bunch of, you know, military arsenal equipment for Ukrainians to use inside of Ukraine, you know, kind of the way like the Chinese did with Vietnam, then yeah, that'd be fine. Because I mean, like, there's runs on Russian banks right now. Russian bonds are down like 50 to 70%. I mean, like, they're having a major catastrophe right now in that country. So if they don't get it now, they're not going to get it. And if they fuck that up, they could be in a real world of hurt. And then, like, let's say hypothetically, Russia has nothing on China. So let's suppose,
except technology for airplanes.
I mean, they got nothing on them leverage wise.
Okay.
So,
outside of their both disdain for the 60s in America.
And there's also an issue where A-Trades is concerned Hoovers might try to take them over because that's just what they do. So
it's not possible.
Possible. Very possible. That's the only reason why Russia has historically worked with the Western countries to try to keep China at bay for the last 70 years. It was certainly the last 20. It's been our policy since the 70s to make sure that...
So you're saying you believe world leaders, niggas running these hoods, are still trying to colonize in 2022?
If not blatantly raise the Chinese flag there, then exert so much influence that there's just no practical autonomy and you're a puppet state. I mean, really, population-wise, China is more than 10 times the size of Russia, and monetarily they're more than 10 times the size of Russia. So if they wanted to really exert influence and start to choke off their ability to do their thing, and they don't have anywhere to run to for help, they're going to become... They'll have no choice but, when Xi Jinping says jump, to simply ask, how high, sir?
So you think Russia could actually be putting themselves in a bad situation with the Hoovers? The A-Trades could be putting themselves in a bad situation with the Hoovers.
If they allow them to get too strong and they themselves to become too dependent, that would be something that they'd have to look out for. Because when you get too dependent on one single source and their whole ability to do all that shit is dependent on one relationship, then that person has the power over you.